And now I'll welcome to the stage Raymonde from Raymond Weyzen, that you're talking about data ecosystems, and actually from this kind of maybe continuing from what Mimo was just saying about the standards and best practices and different kind of how to share data. Well, that is basically where we left off with Mimo. Are you ready to go, Raymonde?
Yes, very much so. Thank you. I think this is a very natural bridge to the previous talk. Indeed. Well, my name is Raymonde Weyzen. I am a consultant at the Support Center for Data Sharing. As you enjoyed the previous presentation, I can bridge to this by going into what it is that we do at the Support Center for Data Sharing and why we think that data sharing is a key enabler for our digital society. So please allow me to introduce that to you in these coming 20 minutes. I think we're all familiar with smart devices like voice assistants, smart watches, smart cars, and systems like Google Home. All of them are made possible by sharing data. They're connected to the internet to send data and receive instructions for how to operate. Turning on the lights in your house with Google Home is no longer a physical act of turning a switch, but part of an interconnected digital system that you operate through an app or by using your voice. These technologies are not only designed to make our lives easier and more convenient, and I think to a large extent we can all agree that they do, but they also raise concerns around privacy. I think it was back in 2019 when it came to light that Amazon's Alexa fixed bugs by having employees listen into people's conversations, that people really became aware of the extent to which these technologies invade our personal lives. And this has caused quite a stir. So tech companies are gaining a lot of social and economic influence, and Europe is committed to control that power, as last year's court case against Facebook, for example, has shown. According to the EU, the influence that these tech companies has can threaten EU citizens' control over their personal data and constrain both the growth of EU high technology companies, but also the ability of national and EU lawmakers to enforce their laws. So therefore, the EU is committed to protect their citizens, but also to create a single market for data that ensures Europe's global competitiveness. And this is laid out clearly in the European Strategy for Data, and perhaps an initiative, part of this that you've seen more recently is the common European data spaces that are part of this strategy. So as I said, it's a way to protect citizens, but also to protect data sovereignty. And it is through these ecosystems that not only more data will become available for use in the economy and society, but it will also keep companies and individuals who generate the data in control. I'm navigating through my next slide. Apologies for the delay. But this rationale that I explained for protecting EU citizens is the basis for what formed the Support Center for Data Sharing. Funded by the European Commission, the initiative was set up a couple of years ago and aims to facilitate data sharing, but also link the expertise of data sharing practitioners and researchers to each other to really build that data ecosystem together. The initiative is funded by DG Connect, which is the Director General for Communications Networks, Content and Technology of the European Commission. And at the Support Center, we collect, develop, and disseminate data sharing practices that employ novel models or that tackle legal and technological challenges. And we do so in various ways. We provide technical and legal support, for example. We showcase best practices. We have regular talks with data sharing practitioners that we cover on the data talks. And well, when you think of providing technical and legal support, for instance, you can think of the API friendliness checker, where you can check your API against essential quality and usability criteria. But we also provide more extensive reports for legal guidance in different kind of sectors. So how do you set up model contracts for data sharing in agriculture, for example? or what is important when you get to licensing data in, say, manufacturing. All of these different sectors are, we provide support for them through our various reports. And then regularly we talk to data sharing practitioners, either in practice examples where we provide more of a narrative of these organizations and how they leverage the potential of data sharing, or through data talks, which are more informal interviews where people can step in and ask questions, which is more of a platform for open discussion. And well, for the remainder of this presentation, I would like to share with you what it is that we learned from talking to these data sharing practitioners, and how they all, in their own way, show how data sharing enables a digital society. I will highlight 3 interviews with practitioners from very different backgrounds. So please allow me to go into that. Our first example comes from the technology sector and taps into both technology, but also policy and regulation. So last year, we interviewed Jeremy Wallison, Senior Director for EU Government Affairs at Microsoft EU, to discuss their open data campaign. We know that around the world, data is playing an increasingly important role, and as digital technologies become more and more integrated in our daily lives, we also generate more and more data. This means that stakeholders like governments and businesses have access to a lot of data and a lot of information, which they can, of course, use to develop goods and services that are very much tailored to people's needs. But Microsoft argues that if this data remains tapped and untapped and closed, then humanity will more and more head into what they call a data divide, which is a situation where data is concentrated in the hands of a small number of companies. To prevent this from happening and close this divide, so to speak, Microsoft launched our Open Data campaign back in April 2020. This initiative aims to empower organizations to realize the benefits of data, and this can include opening, sharing, and collaborating around data to support decision-making, but also to improve efficiency or tackle societal challenges. They worked on climate change, for example, but also the COVID-19 pandemic more recently. So to achieve this ambition, the initiative makes use of data and AI to build an open and trusted data ecosystem for all stakeholders involved. And this can mean private citizens, government bodies, entrepreneurs, SMEs, but also large international companies or even research institutions. The difficulty in creating ecosystem lies usually in the willingness of organizations to share data. Many organizations are reluctant, and the reasons for this reluctancy are quite varied. First and foremost concern is that there is the risk of losing the competitive advantage. Traditionally, code that is created by organizations such as Microsoft and their competitors has been closed. However, in recent years, more and more companies are publishing their code as open source. And sometimes this even leads to better quality code, arguably. Although opening code to outside contributors raises a bunch of questions around monetization and ownership, most companies who have went into this avenue of publishing as open source have become very successful at it and are still growing companies that make a lot of money. So that risk can be mitigated. So that's one part of why organizations are reluctant to share data. But another one is the legal difficulty that's often involved in sharing data. One of the examples that Jeremy has mentioned in our talk is that startups, for example, often get very enthusiastic about a new idea and they have just identified the main data sources that they need. But then when this idea starts to become bigger and where their legal department gets involved, the project often slows down as it's unclear if the data is permitted to be accessed and shared and for which purposes the data can be used, or even who owns the data and who owns the IP. So these uncertainties can really slow down the process and sometimes make it even impossible to continue. Apart from these two concerns, privacy also affects the practice of sharing data, especially when personal data is involved. An example of a project that Microsoft was part of last year deals with London traffic passenger data, which is, well, personal information and hence quite sensitive. But they overcome this difficulty by collecting and publishing the data in an aggregated format. Thereby, it virtually becomes impossible to link data back to an individual person, and in that way, the privacy of individuals is protected. The Open Data Campaign increases access to data on the one hand, and is, as Jeremy describes it, a toolbox for players to use and improve their own systems and data sets. It is really through sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, and learning from others that the entire ecosystem can benefit. And this benefit outplays the risks of, well, the concerns really of privacy, legal aspects, competitive advantage, because even through sharing knowledge and working in this ecosystem together with others and learning from others, everybody can still grow without losing their advantage. So this is an example from technology that I mentioned. The next example that I will show you is quite different, also a technology provider, but with an entirely different rationale for their creation. So as part of our practice example interviews, last year we also talked to MiCo, which is short for Me Economy or Me Ecosystem. And they joined us for a very interesting talk when we talked to the founder and CEO, Katrina Dow, and CCO, Jason Smith. And they showed us their company and what it is that they do. And we got to know them as well. An infrastructure provider for citizens, businesses, and organizations, but quite unique in the sense that they that they have privacy at their core business. So they really care about safely collecting, protecting, and exchanging data and giving control back to the users. So what they do is they provide the infrastructure that makes it possible to maintain a digital self. So how was this idea born? Well, pretty much out of a sci-fi movie, actually. Perhaps some of you remember the film Minority Report back in 2022. I was not there to watch it, but this film portrayed an amazing sort of data-connected society with features like flying cars, but also, on the other hand, aspects that were really creepy, like data that was used to read people's thoughts before they took any action. And well, Katrina told us that this idea really sparked the creation of MiCo, as it portrayed a society that has great digital convenience at the one hand, but on the other, humans lose their autonomy and control over their decision-making process because high-tech machines took over. So this was in 2002, when the world had already seen the creation of the internet and search engines, and social platforms were also on the rise. So by then, the concept of digital identity was still an abstract one, but this ultimately manifested in what we now know as GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. And this really increased users' awareness of their privacy as people realized, perhaps even for the first time, that their data was being collected. So against this backdrop, MiCo's founders explored the evolution of a digital self, type of technological agency, part of the value chain, and what it would mean to have this kind of agency in a hyper-connected world. Ultimately, this led to the creation of a platform which enables privacy by design, considers regulatory frameworks, and is a very transparent business model. The solutions that MiCo provides serve multiple sectors, for instance, healthcare, finance, education, or transport. One of the examples that they mentioned in our interview was the solution they created for KBC Bank in Belgium, which enables customers to collect and protect their data inside their own banking app. And neither the bank nor MiCo has access to that data. And the analogy here is that, well, in the past, banks used to offer a physical vault for protection. And now our lives become more and more digital. This is sort of a digital equivalent that still protects users and our information, But then, yeah, well, as I say, entirely digital. So another example is a children's platform that Mikko designed named Mixit. And this media platform is for children aged 0 to 7, and it enables children to have access to several sorts of media that are both curated by their parents and detached from the internet. So children can explore and play with media without tracking advertising or algorithms that track their behavior. So this, on the one hand, offers parents the opportunity to monitor their child's digital footprint, and they sort of can sit back and relax and don't have to worry about what's coming next up on their screen. So as we head towards a more digital society, we already witness this as a result of the pandemic, really. Our way of working is also becoming more digital. And I might not have mentioned this at the beginning, by the way, but all of these examples that I'm mentioning are also conducted in COVID-19 times. So yes, there are interviews, but all digital. So we already see that there is much less physical interaction in the process of working. And this will also happen for recruiting and onboarding of new colleagues. And in that process, Mikko sees that trust is becoming more and more important. So employers will increasingly have questions like, who are you? Should you even be at this office? Are you who I expect you to be? And in this slide, digital identity, location, and skills are going to become more important. And they have to be supported in a digital way. And with the platform that Mikko provides, this is possible. A key thing that was mentioned in this interview is trust, actually. So although Mikko offers the infrastructure to safeguard privacy as much as possible, all parties have to participate in this to ensure that there is trust and transparency. However, currently there's little trust in organizations. And people feel the need to protect their data and to control what's happening online. But it is through providing these safe ecosystems that that the trust among people will also grow, and that they can have trust in these digital equivalents of identity. So digital society will become more and more connected and convenient through technology, but at the same time, regulation and legislation is necessary to protect people's rights, and the resources need to be in place when something goes wrong and people need to reach out, for example. Building tools that make the exchange of information transparent, equitable, and ethical can not only ensure better outcomes, but ultimately lead to a more meaningful and healthy digital society. And a key point of talking to Mikko was also that they say, well, it's about limiting the trade-off between convenience and control. So on the one hand, you would like to have a tool that's very easy to use. And yes, for convenience, it is necessary that some data is shared. But on the other hand, obviously, you also need to protect people's privacy and give them a sense of control over their data. So my final example I would like to share with you is ClearML, which is an open source and machine learning deep solution of Allegro AI. And last year we were joined by Dror Barlev, who is a sales and business development director at the company. And ClearML is, the idea of ClearML is to give data engineers, scientists, and product managers, and also IT people, practically everybody who gets their hands on data, a good platform to work with machine learning solutions and deep learning models, and give them the tools to do so in a meaningful way. So it's a unified platform that facilitates collaboration, joint experiment management, and easy model deployment for machine learning models that are already in production. So when ClearML was set up, the team realized that not everyone was willing to share data, which is something that Microsoft mentioned in their interview as well. So therefore, the system was designed for what they call the zero data move, which means that the data remains where it is stored, secured, and its privacy is safeguarded. The models that the data scientists build with that data are executed in a different space, meaning the design is decentralized. The fact that the data doesn't move and thus remains in the hands of the provider is particularly important for industries that have sensitive data. So think of healthcare or industries that are super competitive, like aviation or autonomous systems and robotics, for example. So these are cases where the data is shared directly. So there are cases where the data is shared directly, but usually it makes more sense to share the insights only. Another example where this can be very useful is camera surveillance. So in Israel or the UK, for example, there are many cameras throughout cities. And though the information that lies in the data is very useful, the vast amount of data itself is really not. So how does it work to then share data insights, but not the data itself? Well, what they do is they separate three pieces of software: a data scientist environment, GPU machines, and then an experiment manager. So in this data scientist environment, a data scientist, engineer, or product manager, they can work, they have the right to use certain data, they can create code there. And then at the GPU machine level, the number crunching really happens with the GPU, CPU, cloud, edge, or any hybrid format. And then in the final stage, experiment manager, this is where management and monitoring takes place. So here the data tracking is performed, metadata and hyperparameters can be assessed, and the results of the experiments are shown. So really through separating these three spaces, the person in charge, person managing it only has access to hyperdata and the model, but not the data itself. And the benefit of this becomes really clear in an example from oncology that Dror has mentioned in our talk. So one of the oncologist's tasks is the interpretation of images. Images, that is the data, they remain in the hospital on device or on a local server. But the model is created outside that space. So the monitoring software can be located on any server, eliminating the need for data access. That way you can work with the description of the data and the hyperparameters where the true value of the data lies. You can work on the models collaboratively with others who have other expertise or who have their own data, for example. Now, this eliminates the problem of having to duplicate or transferring data altogether. Working with the data in this way is not only more efficient, but it's also a precondition for a trusting relationship. The company behind ClearML, Allegro AI, serves both the European and American markets. And from experience, they've noticed that the US and Europe are both looking to set up projects and ecosystems to enable data sharing, but they're not aware of each other yet. So one of the developments that Dror mentioned in his talk was, I'm very curious to see whether we'll have two systems, in a European and an American one, or that we can have some kind of synthesis where bridges can be built. According to them, we are generating data constantly, and we have to find a way to all participate in this value generation and not do it so separately. So taking a step back and looking at the takeaways from all of these from these three practice examples that I've showed you, I highlighted a couple of quotes. One thing that really stood out from the Microsoft talk was data should be as open as possible and as close as necessary. This is really what the Open Data Campaign stands for. And this is also, I think something that more and more of the practitioners that we talk to seem to agree to. Then Miko, Katrina Dow, she told us, while privacy is paramount, you can't have a digital economy if everyone is locking their entire digital footprint away. This is what I highlighted earlier. It's about this trade-off between control and convenience. It has to work in digital society, so some data has to be shared, but then it has to be protected too. So this is a sort of a thin line of balance that we have to walk. Then ClearML, Dror Barlev. We all know that data is key, but we need a way to produce value with that data. And this is really key to their concept. It's about the insights that lie in the data, not the data itself.
Sorry to interrupt. We are running out of time. So if you can just
Okay.
wrap up really quickly.
Yes, I will. Okay. So bottom line of our talks is that data sharing enables a digital society, but sparks concerns, and not everyone is willing to share. That's why we at the Support Center put out our efforts to make it as easy as possible to lower the barriers. And the EU is very committed to that as well with the European Data Strategy and Common Data Spaces. And if you would like to stay on track of what it is that we do, please follow us via our website or subscribe via our social media channels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think that this was a vital talk at this point, because I know of real cases where startups have both stopped their business idea because there just wasn't data or way to share it, but also they have bumped into public sector and bigger companies who just refuse to share their data, and then the business idea dies. So I think that this is a very needed discussion and thought that everybody needs to think about before starting. Yeah. Thank you for that talk.